So today I just quickly want to go through the system as a whole, just kind of give an overview I am trying to build. So around the outside, I've got a runtime error sidecar, planning on catching every output here first as I build the system. And then once I get to building the provenance layer, anything that affects memory or synthesized inference will be logged here so that it can be audited and traced. And within each piece of provenance, there will be a chain linking it back right to the origin. So outside of the system, this layer is just to represent explicitly outside of the system. And then we have this one-way membrane layer, which is just to signify the separation of data that's generated outside of the system or provided by the user and data that's generated within the system. So just outside of the membrane, there's a receptacle that sits there. The user can put whatever they want into here, and it will be copied through the membrane into this workspace. That's the only function that happens, so that there's a hard line between data that is inside and outside the system. So nothing even happens to the data first. The only function is just a copy into this workspace. Once the documents or whatever really is put into the receptacle and gets copied into the workspace, the data gets normalized, and then I have a special chunking script that will run on semantics instead of just an arbitrary token count, so that the chunks are representative of meaning themselves. So those chunks will then be embedded and indexed and then stored. So these three stores, the index database, the vector database, and then the chunks store themselves, those together make up what I'm just kind of calling like the personal knowledge engine, because it will also have synthesized inferences from the system that will come back into these databases. Runtime sidecar the whole way through. The main data that I plan on feeding this is things like journal entries, book notes, actual books that I plan to scan with my printer. This will also act like the long-term memory for the system, since any inferences that the system makes will be synthesized from this user-supplied data and the inherent training from within the model. And those inferences will come back to this store, and in that manner will act like a long-term memory. I plan to set up a persistent uptime that will have the change detection and copier live all the time. There'll be time triggers and nudges, routines, things like going to catch up on latest journal entries, go read latest book notes, go do research on the latest book notes, write an essay on the latest book notes and any research that you can find on the book, things like that. So on the other side of it, we've got the interface, which is going to be like the UI. I plan to have it plug into VS Code as a coding agent. I also plan to have a front end to do a chat interface through Tori. That'll mostly be used for creative writing. And then I'll have a terminal access for it as well, which I have right now. I'm building the CLI out with it as I build out the library for these nodes. And then sitting under all of the different UIs, there will be a proposal review surface. So those synthesized inferences that I've been talking about before they go back to the ephemeral workspace. The reason I call this an ephemeral workspace is because nothing will be left over. So once the documents are copied from the receptacle into this workspace, nothing is left in the receptacle. Once they're properly chunked, indexed, and embedded, nothing is left in the workspace either. So once the proposals get reviewed, they'll go through provenance and then they'll land in the workspace. and then they'll go through that pipeline to land in the knowledge engine. Under the UI, we've got the control layer. So in here, there's what I'm calling an agent harness, and then permission and boundary checks. So the harness is going to be, I think most of the time in these systems, what's referred to as an intent router. I don't plan on having the system infer intent from the user. I plan to create a system where, actually I use it in VS Code already. So this is the project. I've got this harness right here. It's got an archive policy, handoff packet, policy, known failures, a README. These are different agent roles that are here because these are all for the agent to read. This is the runtime contract for what we're building and verification contracts. And then within there, and then also within the harness, there is some canon. That's a bit of the background as to why I developed it and how the agent should operate. Then there is a folder for implementation projects. So there's active, archive, and inactive. These are the upcoming implementations, and each implementation is broken down into individual seams, and everything is tracked. And this is for my own memory and for the agent, because the context windows are only so much. When you externalize the memory like this, and then also add policies for how the agents are supposed to operate, it's quite powerful. And so I plan to do this practice in this system. So I'll have a coding harness that will just be this one. But then I'll also have one for DaVinci Resolve. I'll make an agent that will be a subject matter expert in that. And then I'll port over the same behavior, but I'll just change the flavor. And so every kind of agent that I want, I'll make a harness for. And it will live in the interface, but it's part of the control layer because it determines how the system is going to operate. So once a user sends in a message or puts their intent into the system, basically, it'll go through boundary and permission checks, then into runtime state, where we've got the turn state and planning orchestrator. This is basically the brain of the whole thing. This is going to decide where everything is being routed to. And beside the turn state and planning orchestrator, we're going to have working memory. This is just going to be a small, like chat-sized context window, nothing crazy, because all of the long-term memory is going to live here in this database. And then we're gonna have both frontier model API and local model backend for a mix between privacy and power, basically. And then we'll have tool execution for it where the model can call out to a shell. I'll build a special corpus retrieval service for this database, app connectors, external search, GitHub and Git operations for the coding agent. So that's just a little overview of what I'm building. I'm still just trying to practice making videos and still think this is a good reason and a good way to be doing them. So you can probably expect to keep going. Thanks again. Bye.